Imagine living in a world with a loving God that waits for you to make a single mistake so he can send you to hell for all eternity for being a fallible human being that he created. You strive living daily, moment by moment, for a loving God who promises rest and peace in the afterlife, only to be told you are nothing, you are a sinner, you are a piece of trash from the pulpit. Nothing you do is right. You are born to die and burn. Nothing you do in life matters unless you do what the church says. Imagine being fearfully and wonderfully made, only to be forced into a beige and boring mold like everyone else, only to be told that individuality is sinful and wrong and you are being coerced by Satan. You use your gifts to help others, to lift up the community, to finance church needs, only for the credit to go to an omnipotent, invisible being. You are only the means to an end. Welcome to Season of Heathens, where I share my experiences in a fundamentalist Christian cult. For 10 years, I was told what to wear, what to listen to, how to think, etc. Making God happy meant obeying my husband, period. To think or act outside of that circle of protection meant damning myself and my children to hellfire and burning. My ex, Nard, used religion to control myself and our children under the eye of the church, who co-signed his behavior as God's will. All my life, I was told to shut up and do as I was told. I was raised to second-guess my intuition, my intellect, and my capabilities. I was the weird kid growing up, the sweet summer child type. Every day was a new adventure to meet new people and share ideas. I believed in the beauty of the world and the goodness of people. If you give love, you receive it tenfold is how I lived my life. As I grew up, I realized that my individuality was not welcome. There are certain societal molds that I couldn't fit into, no matter how hard I tried. I had friends, of course, but there was always this veil or separation of otherness. To be fair, I was a high-energy kid, and, as the mother of high-energy kids, that can be overwhelming to a lot of people. As I grew older, I learned how to mask myself and be what other people wanted me to be. I met my abuser, Nard, when I was a single mom living with my parents. My worldview had shifted some, and my rose-colored glasses had faded. My first marriage had imploded, and I was angry. My favorite person in the world, my grandmother, had died a few years prior. My heart was raw, and I was mad at the world. Turns out giving love and kindness hadn't done squat. Deep inside, I was ashamed of my divorce. It was absolutely necessary. My kid's dad had spiraled into hard drugs when I got fed up and took the kids and left. But religious guilt doesn't factor in common sense, and I felt responsible, like I had let down God. My marriage had been circling the drain for years, but even then I knew that love was a choice. We were supposed to be a team, work together to get through this. But my ex had tapped out years prior, leaving me mentally and emotionally, and later physically, alone to raise 2 little kids as a child myself. I had to swallow my pride and move back in with my parents, even though I felt like I was regressing back to a preteen and had no autonomy. At the time, Nard felt something like redemption for me. Finally, I could show everyone that I can make good decisions. He was attentive, well-spoken, a military veteran, and he loved God. Our first date was at a fast food joint outside my job. When I woke up the next day, he had sent me a text message that kept going and going. This was the time of flip phones, so it broke up long messages. Something about the text didn't sit right with me. I know now that he was love-bombing me, but I told myself at the time that I was being too critical. Nard and I became serious quickly. It started with little things. He got me a King James Version Bible, stating that it was the most accurate translation. I remember my mom following me to the laundry room, agitated, trying to explain that it wasn't the be-all, end-all translation. I wondered at the time why she was so upset about a different version. We had several in the house. I read the New Living Translation. I had a copy of the New International Version from my days in the Church of Christ, and my parents read other versions as well. I didn't see what the problem was and found the Old English version, like poetry. While I won't share my mother's story, it's hers to tell, I will say that she's no stranger to religious abuse, and her alarm bells were going off. She knew exactly what was happening. Unfortunately, she had always been a very private person and never spoke negatively about anyone or anything. I knew bits and pieces from her childhood only through my stories my grandma or aunt would tell. It also didn't help that as a teenager, when I would ask questions about sex or other similar topics, she would tell me, "Christians don't do that," and the conversation would be over. As Nard began to insert himself more and more into my life, my mother became increasingly agitated and opinionated, and the divide between us grew wider. I remember a time when we were both screaming at each other in the kitchen. Never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined speaking in such a way to either of my parents. I was raised to walk on eggshells to avoid the wrath of my dad, which was funny because I distinctly remember my dad sitting in the living room, not making a sound or moving, just staring at the TV in an attempt to avoid being dragged into the melee. It all came to a head when I sat down with my mom at a coffee shop and told her that my kids and I were moving in with Nard. She told me no, not unless I married him. Out of spite, I agreed, and we were married right away. Within weeks, I was pregnant. By this time, Nard had felt prompted by the Lord to go to an independent fundamentalist Baptist church, a far cry from the liberal church I had attended on and off with my mom. Mom and Dad began to attend church with us. Within a few months, we had moved several states away to be closer to Nard's family and his home church, which was also IFBC. Through the kindness of a church member, we were able to rent a home at a reduced cost. I started homeschooling my older kids using Abeka because public school was run by Satan himself. My ex picked up odd jobs with the churchmen, but mostly stayed at home playing video games because he was worried about losing his SSDI if he got a regular job. I stayed home to care for the kids, including our new baby, homeschool the older kids, and keep home. We became heavily involved in church bus ministry, and I joined in women's Bible studies. I made a few friends, but felt keenly left out by most of the women. Like always, I didn't belong, and I knew it. Finances were very tight. I remember at one point having to figure out how to feed our family on $100 a month. My ex didn't approve of me working, so that didn't help. At one point, I went dumpster diving with a church friend to supplement our small pantry. I became pregnant and had another child. We moved again when my ex was deemed fit for duty and re-enlisted in the military. Prior to moving, we found another church, again IFBC, and became members. This church was far smaller, and we dove into volunteering in the bus ministries, Sunday school, VBS, and so on. This was where we stopped wearing pants and tank tops, as I was told I wouldn't be able to volunteer if I didn't change the clothes I wore outside of church. I had to sign a contract promising I would wear modest clothes, covering the knees and shoulders, didn't watch worldly TV or listen to music, go to theaters, the list goes on. For a church that preached against legalism from the pulpit, we sure had a long list of requirements just to be able to volunteer or sing in the choir. When we first moved, I was so grateful because it meant more income and more things to give to the kids. We could travel, buy food and clothes, and have more freedom. That was not to be. Within a year, my ex became disabled again, and, along with taking care of 4 children and endless volunteering at church, I was now a full-time caregiver to my husband. He was still active duty at the time, and I had to deal with military bullshit as well. We went to countless doctors, specialists, and could never find the source of his extreme pain. I advocated loudly for his care, speaking to news outlets and sharing our story. At home, my ex abused his meds and would wander the house at night and cook meals under the influence of his prescription medications. More often than not, I would find blackened remnants of food in the microwave or oven and feared the house burning down. He refused to take his meds in a safe manner, so I effectively stopped sleeping. Along with constant church meetings and listen to him drone on for literal hours during family devotions, I was constantly running on empty. He led us to believe his situation was dire, and I remember steeling myself every morning to wake him for morning meds, fearing that I would find him dead. It was a long 3 years. Church was my only socially acceptable reprieve, but I was burnt out from that too. My ex was eventually approved for a procedure, and it was seemingly a miracle how much he improved in such a short time. He began to drive again, and we took a belated honeymoon. I finally felt all the crying, praying, and sacrifice had worked. God heeded our prayers and blessed us. We were a walking testimony. I remember clearly the first time I met my ex's mother. We were newly married, and I was pregnant with our first. We were driving around town, making small talk, when she suddenly started sobbing and said, "Last name men don't know how to be faithful." I was frozen in shock at the sudden change and had no idea how to handle the situation. I would later learn that her husband, my ex's dad, would leave the family every few years for a woman he met, cutting them off financially and physically, until finally apologizing to the church as a changed man and being welcomed back. God healed him. It was a miracle. 9 times God touched and healed his heart, and 9 times was he accepted back into the fold. I would sit behind them in church, and my ex-mother-in-law's body language would try to get as far away from her husband as possible. Legs crossed away from him, arms crossed, foot constantly tapping in the air. She would run for hours in the middle of the night on her treadmill, but still she remained in the marriage. You might wonder if the apple falls far from the tree. If by that you mean the apple started an affair with a married woman half his age, then you would be correct. He removed me from our joint bank account and spent it all on his new supply. He filed for divorce, claiming that he couldn't see me as his wife anymore since I had been his caregiver for so long. The shock was immeasurable, and I lost about 30 pounds in a month. I was in a fog for weeks, barely functioning. My family lived close by and kept me floating. I can't ever repay them for that. This was when I started therapy. While medical and mental health professionals are generally mistrusted by fundies due to mandatory reporting, I was still able to see this one. She is a Christian, but never indoctrinated my therapy sessions. I was allowed to feel and be human. I still see her to this day. To wrap up my story in a nutshell, my ex and I had attempted reconciliation due to pressure from his family and our church. It was a huge mistake, and he made it clear that he had not changed at all. His behavior became more controlling and erratic because I was now standing up for myself and my children. I asked multiple times for an amicable divorce, and his answer was always, "No, we are not getting a divorce." I begged God to deliver us. I made a plan to quietly leave with the kids and started the process. Push came to shove, literally, and he was arrested, and I was granted an order of protection. The next 6 months were as if the horrors of our decade-long marriage were concentrated. He stalked me, harassed me, threatened me to get me to stop my divorce proceedings. He spread lies far and wide, and all of the people I thought were my friends turned away from me. I received harassment from his family, who told me that I was turning against God for divorcing my abuser. I learned how to use the block button and began the process of healing my family and making our home a safe space. I got my first job in 10 years and worked hard to earn a nursing license. I'm able to provide for my children everything they need and some of what they want. Never again will I have to tell them we can't afford underwear this month while Daddy plays video games on all of his expensive equipment. Our home is a place of peace and authenticity where we are allowed to feel our emotions and talk them through. We practice kindness. I am learning to get back to my old self. I'm still working on the trauma and processing it with my therapist. All my life, I've ignored my needs and intuition, and the last few years have showed me that the person I can and should trust the most is myself. While my experience goes far deeper than what I've talked about today, I hope it's given you a small glimpse of who I am and what religious abuse can look like. As I upload more content, I intend to include more specific details relevant to whatever topic I write about. To write out my entire story would be hours long, and as I personally have the attention span of a housefly, I wouldn't want to listen to someone ramble for that long. This is my story. I share it with you in the hopes that, if you are starting your own journey in healing, you know you're not alone. My own walk has been paved with the help and encouragement of others, and I want you to discover your truths. May the bridges I burn light the way.